Infrastructure provisioning has long been caught between two extremes: slow, ceremony-heavy infrastructure as code and risky ad hoc console clicking. What if there was a middle path where you could describe what you need in plain English and the system will build it for you safely within your existing policies? That is the idea behind Spacelift Intent, a new open source and early access commercial innovation that brings natural language provisioning to cloud infrastructure. And joining me today is Marcin Wyszynski, co-founder and Chief R&D Officer at Spacelift, to talk about what intent means for the future of DevOps and platform engineering. Marcin, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
We cover Spacelift at TFR on a regular basis, but for those who are new in this space, tell us a bit about the company and the problem you are set out to solve, which will lead us naturally into what you are announcing today.
So I primarily built Spacelift because I was tired of watching teams struggle with infrastructure collaboration. I was a consultant helping customers to migrate to cloud, and I kept seeing the same problem over and over again. Terraform itself was very powerful for one person, but it was an utter chaos for teams. Terraform Enterprise from HashiCorp was available, but it wasn't necessarily what solved my problems. So I essentially scratched my own itch. I built what I wished that existed. I built infrastructure as code that's actually designed to be multiplayer, not just like shared state files or remote execution, but real collaboration. So a layer that controls who changed what, when, why, and with what policies and audit trails, etc. We essentially made infrastructure a team sport. And when HashiCorp pulled their BSL move on Terraform, we helped launch OpenTofu with other industry players. Today, we're by far the largest sponsor of that.
Thank you. Now let's talk about intent. You are calling it codeless infrastructure provisioning. First of all, what is intent and how does it relate to infrastructure as code? Does it replace it or complement it?
Intent is not meant to replace infrastructure as code. It is designed to fill that massive gap between stupid console clicking and full Terraform ceremony. You know, the proverb, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And in fact, for a lot of DevOps people, a lot of people building infrastructure, there was just one hammer available. There was just a Terraform and everything looked like a nail. Otherwise, the only other alternative was unacceptable, was just clicking on a console. So when you think about your typical infrastructure as code flow, let's say you need a database. Okay, so first you need to learn HCL syntax because Terraform comes with its own language. It's a nice language, but it's, you need to learn it. And then you need to research the provider docs. Okay, you want a database, but now you need to be able to express that database in a particular way that Terraform expects it. So you need to research that, you need to learn that. Then there's probably like 50 lines of configuration. You need to handle dependencies. And then if you're starting from scratch, then you need to set up a backend and you configure like a CI/CD. Then you create a pull request. You wait for a review. Then you run a plan. You get an approval. Then you apply. And that's like hours at least, and maybe days if you're just starting. It's a long time. In the meantime, let's say your colleague says, okay, I'll just click 3 buttons in the AWS console and you have a database in 30 seconds. Sure, it's not repeatable, it's not governed in any shape or form, but they're shipping features while all you're doing is just debugging Terraform. And so like you have one approach that feels very ceremonial, very slow, and the other approach that sounds unsustainable. So do we have something in the middle? And I think intent is something that sits in the middle. You say, I need a Postgres database for my staging environment. What intent does is it translates that directly to provider, OpenTofu provider API calls. It is not generating Terraform code, but it's actually calling the AWS APIs mediated by the provider. It's the same governance, it's the same audit trail, same policy engine as your Terraform stacks in Spacelift, but there's no ceremony. So when would you use that? Well, I mean, if you're doing production networking, then please write proper Terraform. But if you're just quickly experimenting on something that might or might not become real one day, then I'd say use intent. If you're doing like a complex multi-region deployment, use Terraform. If you just need an S3 bucket for experiments, use Intent. I think the beauty is that they coexist. Intent provisioned resources can then be imported into Terraform later, or they might not be. Like, you can keep them in Intent if that works. It's not about replacing infrastructure as code. It's about having the right tool for the right moment. I think what AAC was good at is it solved Clickops chaos, and Intent solves AAC ceremony, and both have their place.
When you mentioned hammer and nail, I immediately thought of AI because that is how everybody is using it today. But many DevOps teams worry that AI-driven provisioning could compromise control, security, or compliance visibility. How does Intent maintain those guardrails while still able to deliver automation?
I think we need to be explicit about what Intent is in which version. We're actually launching two versions at the same time. One is a public, open source, publicly available repository and project on GitHub. That's available today. And then there's an early access commercial version of Intent that is a Spacelift mediated experience. The open source experience is essentially an MCP server that would give you access to local Terraform providers. And it's a single player mode. It works very similar to Terraform. It just, you do express intent locally inside your LLM and everything stays on your machine. There is no multiplayer mode. With a Spacelift version, the same MCP server becomes a remote MCP server, and now you have this very powerful middleware that is essentially the same Spacelift experience as you would get from our more traditional IAC offering. So you get policies, you get audit trail, you get access control, and all of those things that you used to with Terraform. So you can express a policy in the same open policy agent that you'd express for something like a Terraform stack in Spacelift that would prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot in a way that, your infrastructure or your security team does not like. The only difference really here is that rather than being based on a project level, the policies would be based on a particular resource level. But again, those policies will allow you to either completely reject a resource update, completely approve a resource update, or flag a resource update or resource creation for a manual review. So you'd get, let's say, an equivalent of Terraform plan, but expressed as intent. And you'll get the whole view inside a nice GUI. So there's really a difference between a single player mode, which is very much like Terraform, and a multiplayer mode for which the governance and all that, security guardrails are exactly the same as for more traditional Terraform.
You're launching two versions, an open source release and a commercial early access offering. What kind of workloads should teams start with when testing intent? Critical or non-critical? And what kind of feedback are you looking for before it's production ready?
So we're currently envisioning two main use cases for intent, commercial intent. One is quick experimentation. So if you're just building infrastructure for a project and this is not a production usage thing, you're just messing around, you're trying to connect the dots to understand how certain things could be wired, and you're being slowed down by a more traditional approach to AAC, like with Terraform, then being able to vibe code your infrastructure, the V1 of your infrastructure, sounds like a perfect choice. Like, you're probably vibe coding your feature in the first place, so why wouldn't you vibe code the underlying infrastructure? So that's one thing. The other interesting use case is that people often talk about what's known as unmanaged drift. So these are the things that you're managing with Terraform, or sorry, you're not managing with Terraform. You're actually they exist in your AWS account or they exist in your Azure account, but they were just provisioned using Clickops or various shell scripts, right? And you kind of forgot about them. This is a big topic in cloud security and cloud management, because this is like shadow IT. Where I think intent really shines is that intent can detect those using Terraform data sources. You can query for all those unused resources or unmanaged resources, and then bring them into intent management. Let's call it soft managed using intent. And then when you feel like you want to start managing them using the full ceremony, then you can export them into full Terraform management. And that, I think, is the second very compelling use case.
Walk us through what the workflow looks like in practice. Are engineers prompting the system, reviewing generated plans, and then approving changes? How much human oversight stays in the loop?
If you've worked with a coding assistant like Claude Code or any desktop version like Claude Desktop, you'll probably recall that there are different ways of running MCP tools. So you can put an MCP tool into like always on mode or always available, or you can ask for each individual call to be reviewed separately. And then if you're able to review it separately, you see the input that is going to be passed into each particular call. So if you're working on open source intent, then your guardrails become the ability to review what the tool is doing, each MCP call, because effectively what intent is it's that MCP server that is intercepting your requests, and you can control what falls in or what flows into the MCP server. With the commercial intent, you actually have 2 points of control. One is obviously that, but the other point of control is the central server, which will enforce your guardrails, your organizational guardrails. So even if you click on allow in the tool itself, or you go full YOLO mode, I'm not saying I endorse it, but if you go full YOLO mode, then the policies on the central server will essentially say, no, sorry, you can't do this. You need to try again, right? And so the amount of human oversight really depends on your particular task and your risk profile with whatever you're doing. Like you'll have a different risk profile working on production infrastructure. Not that we recommend that you use it on production infrastructure, but you have a different risk profile depending on what you do. If you're just doing like one-off resources for a quick and dirty throwaway prototype, you'll have a very different risk profile than even if you're working on a pre-prod version of your infrastructure, right? And again, like single player versus multiplayer mode, you might have different ways of working and different risk profile.
From what I have been observing, Spacelift has always focused on policy-driven automation. How do you ensure the plans intent generates are explainable and reproducible, not just black boxes?
Intent is actually not doing anything magical here. Intent is translating in like natural language into a state of Terraform resources. So when you are making a request to an intent server, there's a few back and forth. Like first we query for the schema of a resource that you want to provision. And then before we provision that resource, we're showing you the desired state of that resource, which means that you're seeing the exact same thing as you're seeing in the Terraform plan. It's exactly the same thing expressed in exactly the same way. You're just seeing it without the whole Terraform scaffolding. You're just seeing it as a JSON thing, and then you can have AI or your LLM explain what you're seeing. But essentially, we're not hiding anything from you. It's very open. It's very transparent what we're doing. It's the same for deletes. It's the same for updates. Effectively, like intent is just a translator of human language, LLM defined tool call, and a provider API call. Nothing hidden there. Very, very similar and fully compatible with Terraform and OpenTofu.
Today, a lot of IT leaders are asking what AI means for DevOps and platform engineering. With intent and natural language provisioning now emerging, how do you see AI reshaping the future of DevOps and platform engineering?
It's a very good question, because like we can't really predict the future, can we? I can only think about like I think if we could predict the future, it would already be here. But like we can try to extrapolate some trends that we've been seeing, right? I think one thing that you've been seeing is a move slightly away from DevOps and towards what people call platform engineering, right? So DevOps being the developers that do operations, and platform engineers are essentially people who want to ensure that the operations are not even there, right? They want to democratize the access and remove the need for as much operations as possible. And I think from that point of view, Intent kind of accelerates what platform engineering is after, which is the self-service. I mean, if you think about it today, when you talk about Terraform self-service, then the definition frequently is, oh, here's that Terraform module with 47 different inputs, go figure, right? But with Intent, let's say a data scientist can say, I need a GPU cluster for model training. And, they don't need a module. They don't need the inputs. They just get their cluster, right? They express the need. They might have to, elaborate on that need if that can't be translated into a direct request. But essentially that would be a conversation rather than the need to go back and forth between documentation, the module, and the DevOps team that created that module. What that does is it kind of kills the ticket queue, right? The DevOps team is no longer a bottleneck. It's not, because ticket queue is not engineering. It's like human middleware, right? Intent takes over. Like you can have AI take over that middleware of intent or human intent into an actual resource mapping. And I think it's really good at it, and it allows people to focus on real engineering, real planning, as opposed to just being a guardian of Terraform expertise. And as I said, like DevOps as expressed as developers doing ops is kind of disappearing because it's, becoming less relevant if there are less ops. That's essentially my take on that. Now, is that like a complete revamp of how people do things? No, I think it's just like a force multiplier and one of the tools that allow this move towards the democratization of infrastructure and removing yourself as a human as a bottleneck from all of the infrastructure related tasks.
Are there other early experiments in AI-driven infrastructure provisioning, whether open source or commercial? And what edge Intent has over them, given your deep involvement with OpenTofu? In other words, what edge do early adopters get by joining the open source or early access track?
Yeah, it's an excellent question because it touches the core of what Intent is. I think if you looked at how people used AI in infrastructure, and especially in Terraform space before, it was to generate HCL code. And I'm not saying it's bad. Like we all love coding assistants. I love my Claude code. I'm not giving my Claude code away. It's very efficient, and writing code is something that they're very good at. It's just, it is not very clear to me whether you're actually solving any real problem with AI or just you're building a faster hammer, right? Because if Terraform is a hammer and everything looks like a nail, then writing Terraform using AI is like making a faster hammer. You can, it can move faster, but it's still solving the same problem in the same way, right? There's still ceremony involved. With Intent, we're turning the problem on its head. We're not using Terraform at all. Like we're using Terraform providers, and we're using AI to be a translation layer between your intent and directly the provider. So it's like we're short-circuiting Terraform. If you think about like there's this long electrical circuit of how you build infrastructure as code and how you get from like your intent through HCL, through the whole provider, backend, blah, 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 all of those steps. We're like this guy that just short circuits and jump starts the whole thing. And that's what AI makes possible. Previously, it wasn't possible because humans were not very good at writing provider calls directly. But actually, AI is pretty good at it. So instead of using AI to write code that is then understood by a machine, we're essentially saying, hey, just make machine calls directly, short circuit and jumpstart. A very different approach from what we've seen in the past.
Now, if I ask you, do you think this will eventually become its own category, something like infrastructure by intent, or will it fold back into traditional ISC tools over time?
I think it's very difficult to know. I think my personal belief is that there is a massive need for something between Clickops and infrastructure as code. And it's essentially this category will exist, however it is implemented, right? I think our take so far is the best I've seen. It'll get better over time. We open sourced it. We will let people play around with it, give us feedback, help us make it the exact thing that they want. But honestly, like playing around with it, having like a few goes at building infrastructure with it, I don't want to go back. It feels like, finally my infrastructure behaves the same way as my code behaves. I can vibe code my application and suddenly I can give access to intent to my coding assistant and it provisions infrastructure at the same time. And it's not toy infrastructure, it's real infrastructure. So honestly, I think the category is with us to stay. And I do believe that our entry into the category is the strongest I've seen so far.
What kind of symbiotic relationship, what kind of synergy do you see between the open source and commercial versions? And do you see intent staying as a Spacelift project or eventually aligning under something like OpenTofu?
This will remain a Spacelift open source project. We are a member of OpenTofu organization, but this is not an OpenTofu project. We're kind of piggybacking on the OpenTofu ecosystem. That's, OpenTofu ecosystem is what makes it possible in the first place. But this will, for the foreseeable future, be a Spacelift open source project. And if at some point it makes sense for a foundation to adopt it and standardize, then sure, why not? The symbiotic relationship is an interesting question as well. The way I see it is, there's a single player mode and a multiplayer mode. I think open source projects are generally very good at being single player. But whenever multiplayer comes in, this is where you need like a central server. This is where you need governance. You need SLAs. You need someone to be on a pager rotation for something like that. You need regular bug fixes, update cadences, edge cases, corporate governance, etc. That's where commercial products really shine. It's not the core features that they really shine. It's what is built on top of those core features, what makes it possible to work as a large team, what makes it possible to work in a sophisticated, technologically advanced and secure organization. That's what I believe is worth paying money for, not the core feature.
What kind of feedback or contributions are you hoping to see from the community? At the same time, do you have any time frame when this early access will be fully ready for production?
I'll start with the second one, otherwise I'll forget about it. We are hoping to share it with humanity for Christmas this year. So we're aiming for GA before Christmas. In terms of feedback, for Intent open source, we're mainly looking for people playing with it and telling us what it's good at. We've, as testers, we've spent countless hours testing it with different AI providers, with different workloads, etc. But effectively, we're just a small sample and we're giving it for free as open source to the community to essentially tell us what they want to do with that. Because I believe, as with every project out there, that the best ideas don't come from within. They actually come from without. Your projects are being used in ways you haven't imagined before. And I do believe that, releasing that as open source opens up the possibility for people to come up with new, very, very creative ideas for using this technology. I think a good analog of that is that I think when OpenAI released ChatGPT, they had no idea how people would use that. And then people said, oh, I think you should be able to control my computer. And they were like, oh my God, how do you go about that? Oh, there's tool calls. Then, there's the whole MCP ecosystem starting. I think as an author of technology, you need to be humble and optimize for serendipity, allowing people to kind of discover ways on how they find that technology working best for them.
Marcin, thank you so much for your time today. As we all know, infrastructure as code transformed how we manage the cloud. But now with tools like Intent, we could actually transform how we create it. Once again, thank you for joining us and walking us through what's next for Spacelift and AI-driven provisioning. And I look forward to chat with you again. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
And back to our audience, it's really exciting time to live in where you can actually build your infrastructure using natural language provisioning. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.